Welcome to the Steady On Stronger Together podcast. I am your host, Angie Bauman. We all have hard parts of our stories, some that we wish were not there. Heather Dixon, my guest today, knows how difficult it can be to find hope when you don't like your story. Heather is living with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, an incurable genetic disorder that affects the tissues inside her body. Heather's ministry, The Rescued Letters, was birthed from her experiences following this diagnosis. Now she works to encourage women to live by faith, even when we don't like our stories. She joins me today to talk about her new Bible study, Renewed, a look at the book of Ruth through the eyes of Naomi. Let's listen in. Hello, Steady On friends, and welcome to this week's Stronger Together conversation. My name is Angie Bauman, and I am delighted to be welcoming our guest today, Heather Dixon, who has written, she is the author of this fairly new Bible study called Renewed that we're going to dive into in just a little bit. And it is a look at the book of Ruth through Naomi's perspective. You know what I love about studying and teaching the Bible, Heather, I just let you speak to this before I even introduce you, is I love looking at something that you think you know and looking at letting a light shine from a different point of view, a different perspective. And your heart just gets flooded with this. Oh my goodness, I didn't know that was in there. And I just think that your study is rich with that. And so what is your goal with that, with writing from a different perspective? Can I just have you say that before I even introduce you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, most of us that if we're Bible study veterans, or if you even studied the book of Ruth once, you're going to learn about that Ruth Boaz story, right? And that's great. That's a piece of it. But when you look at the details, the book of Ruth is really written it's Naomi's story. And there are a lot of clues that the author kind of gives you to say, hey, this book is called Ruth, but really this is about Naomi. And so I just kind of wanted to flip that on its end and realize, from our readers, have them realize that for most of us who resonate with Naomi more so than Ruth, like this is for you. And I think the Bible is like that. It's like you can read something, in the year 2000, and then read it in 20 years later and have a completely different perspective because of how God's word speaks tangibly into your lives.
Yeah.
And so yeah, this was just a unique opportunity to kind of show, okay, let's look at this from a different perspective and see what we can learn. And there are lots of really fun, valuable truths that God teaches us through the eyes of Naomi that you might not pick up on if you were reading it from the eyes of Ruth. So,
I love that. I love that. So Heather is an author, a speaker, a Bible teacher, a wife, and a mom to one. How old is your kiddo?
He is almost 14. He's a Thanksgiving baby, so he'll be 14 in just about a week and a half.
Almost. Well, I'm a boy mom too. I have two boys. They are 16 and 11. So yes, boy moms. And and your ministry is called The Rescued Letters. Would you speak to that just a little bit? Why that title, The Rescued Letters?
Sure. I felt like that was such a big piece of my heart for the ministry. And I always describe it as the rescued letters, rescued as in I have been rescued by God more times than I can count, and letters as in I write a bunch of letters about it to people. So to me, that was really the heart of it. It's just, my heart has been rescued so many times by God. And, there were a lot of things I couldn't do after I received this really scary diagnosis, but I could write. And so, I was like, okay, well, these are the letters in my life that have been rescued, and I want to share them with others. So that's a little bit about it. At the heart of it, I write Bible studies, and I teach women to find the courage to live by faith, especially when they don't like their story. And so that is at the heart of the Rescued Letters, because I am definitely that woman that doesn't like her story.
I know. I hear you. I think that there's a real attitude of humility that what you said, in that I have been rescued so many times. And I continue to, this is not a once and done kind of walk, right? This is realizing, for me anyway, this is realizing the new places that I didn't even know I needed rescue, or something new that comes in my life. And I see the pride issues, the sinful tendencies, right? And as we mature, I think this has been my experience, that God continues to rescue us from ourselves over and over again. And I think there's such a
Oh.
teachable spirit there reflected in what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and that's definitely a lesson I've learned. And I think I was naively thought, like I think many of us do. I became a believer when I was 12 years old. My
Mhm.
mom had recently passed away, and I was an unchurched, introvert, shy kid in middle school. And my precious best friend invited me to church camp. I'd never been to church except for Easter Sunday, and that's where I met
A
Jesus.
church camp for introverts, though, is not an easy sell. I'm just
Thank
saying.
you.
Yes, because I'm right there with you. And I loved church camp, but I dreaded it also because it's just so many people. Yeah.
It was. I often found the quiet places. Church
Yes.
camp. This was in North Carolina. This was at this old Civil War fort actually that had been converted to an assembly grounds for churches. And so I often found like the quiet nature places where I could go hide and be by
Yep.
myself. But God met me there
Yeah.
because that's what He does.
Mhm.
And I naively thought, oh, great, I've lost my mom. I've met Jesus. That's the end of my heart stories, right?
Mm.
And that's kind of how our naive minds work, but that's not how this world works. And so that was the heart of it too. Like God rescued me then, and then He rescued me when my dad died, and He rescued me when, I had this scary diagnosis, and He rescued me this morning when I had to get out of my own head and realize die to self, die to self. I mean, there's just this ongoing rescue and renewal that happens when you walk with Jesus. So it's a journey, and it's a beautiful one.
I have actually said to my husband before when I'm struggling with something, I have punched my card. I don't deserve this, right? Like,
Yes.
and I know that's even when it comes out of my mouth, I know how foolish that is. And yet it is how it feels sometimes. Like you said, like, I think this should be I survived something, right? This should be the end of my heart story. And so then I think sometimes we're actually surprised or really surprised when something actually got really hard comes back into our lives. And, like my expression of I've punched my card, I don't deserve this. And yet,
exactly. Where are my picket fences and my unicorn rainbows?
Right, yes.
God, like
I survived the bad thing, and now I want to go to the, and He's like, well, sweetheart, here we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
that's right.
Yeah. And you come to us from the central North Carolina is what you just said, right?
I do.
Yeah.
And I have to apologize to our sweet listeners and those that are joining us live for my precious dog. I just apologize for Angie. She never barks. It's pouring down rain here, and she never barks because the squirrels aren't playing. And of course, as soon as we go live, she's like, oh, I've got something to say. So she's like, I'm sorry.
Rescued.
I know, right? I'm so sorry.
It's all good.
She's really cute.
It's all good. Well, we already did a little bit, but talk to us just a little bit about your new Bible study. Just kind of what is at the heart of it? I know you're talking from Naomi's perspective, but what's at the heart of it? How are you trying to use this story in a new way to encourage your readers?
Yeah, so at the heart of the study is that I resonate so much with Naomi. And a lot of the women in my ministry community are women who are either they're not walking through a season of hardship, Angie. They're walking through a lifetime of a hard story that they did not choose, nor can they change. And so, we all walk through seasons of hardship, but these are life-changing, life-altering stories for them where they're like, okay, this is my story. How do I do with this? How do I make this okay? And so, for me, when I read Ruth, the book of Ruth, I see myself in Naomi. I never see myself in Ruth because she's perfect. I mean, she's just this beautiful, precious character. And I mean, we all love Ruth. We can love Ruth, but I don't see myself in her. I see myself in Naomi. And so I
Call me bitter, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Call me Naomi. Call me bitter. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've stood downstairs.
I punched my card.
I'm bitter. My name is Mara.
I know.
I mean, I stood in my living room downstairs in this house and said, God, I'm done. Like, you have made my life so bitter. I'm over. I'm done with this. And so I wanted to give my readers a safe place to explore that, to explore that feeling of, gosh, why me? Why do I have this hard story?
Yes.
And I think that what is curious, or what is intriguing so much about when you read it through the book of, or through the lens of Naomi, is that our human judgmental eyes want to judge Naomi. And listen, I've heard pastors do this and have said, well, Naomi shouldn't have blamed God. She shouldn't have done this. She shouldn't. But when you look at how God responds to her, he does none of that. She is very upfront and honest with him. She says, I am bitter. I'm changing my name. You've made my life very hard. And the human in us would expect a God that would punish her for that raw, authentic grief, but he doesn't. Never in the story of Ruth does he turn and punish Naomi for her honest, authentic grief. On the contrary, he renews it. And you see that immediately in the first chapter, she's saying, I'm bitter. The second chapter, you can see he's working behind her details to bring her provision and hope and renewal. And so, I thought if we got into the habit of extending grace towards Naomi, then we might also get into the habit of doing it for ourselves and seeing God as the compassionate, loving, renewing God that he is. And so that is at the heart of the story. It's a safe place for women to process their hard story. It's an opportunity to recognize the true character of God and that he is the hero of that story, not Ruth, not Boaz, not even Naomi. God's the hero of that story, and he is the hero of our story. And to give them a seed of hope, knowing that, their story is not for naught. Like God sees, he will renew it, and he promises redemption and good, beautiful things, beauty from ashes out of our hard story. So that's a little bit about the heart of this sweet little manageable 4-week study.
Right. That I was taking notes as you were talking. There's so much good stuff in what you were just saying. I wrote down a safe place to explore, and then I put my call me bitter. I think I think we have a hard time encouraging each other to not be okay. Because there's like in our churches, sometimes we just try to cover it up. Well, if you just have faith, or we say ourselves, I'm just going to have faith. And that's good. It's not like that's a bad thing, but I think we have to acknowledge that sometimes you're like, listen, this whole thing is terrible and I don't feel good. I'm not okay right now.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I love that you're saying that, because I think there is this, particularly in the Christian community and for believers, there is this automatic response that if we express dissatisfaction with the way things are, then that equals a lack of faith. And when you look at the way Jesus responded in the New Testament, you realize that's actually not biblical. Jesus wept, Jesus grieved. He knew that he was going to raise his friend Lazarus from the dead, and he still wept over him because he knew the brokenness in this world. And so if Jesus grieves, and if we see Naomi grieving and God not punishing her for that, then I think, we kind of come to this realization that, wait a minute, an authentic expression of grief is an acknowledgement that we need Jesus in this world. And so I love that you said that too, because I think that there is just this automatic response to say, oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. And I was actually writing this morning on a devotion, and it was, the one thing that I wished someone had told me after my dad died. And it was that you have permission to grieve, have permission to say it's not okay, instead of getting right back in there and jumping right back in like everything's fine. God's going to work good out of this. And he will, but allow yourself the time to express the grief that we still live in a broken world. And even though God is renewing this world every single day, we're not to heaven yet. We're not to the new earth yet. So it's okay to say, Lord, we need you. We need you. This is not okay.
And even to be better and then not better, I think that's where that grace for ourselves comes in, because we're going to have times, I think, where we feel, especially when we're going through that kind of loss, where this doesn't get fixed in a day, right? This doesn't get fixed in a short period of time. There are things from my past that are 30 years old that every once in a while is going to raise their ugly head. That's going to happen to us. And I'm sure with your diagnosis, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I'm sure there are days where you have more peace with that than others, right? Or new information. And so to give ourselves the grace to say, and this is what I call it, these things can share space. I have faith. I believe God is who he says he is. I believe he's with me. And this is a tough day. This is a tough spot where I'm really struggling with this. Both things are true at the same time.
Yes. I love that. This is not, the remembering God's sovereignty and grieving our story are not
Yes.
mutually exclusive.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not an either or, it's an and that's okay. And God
Yes.
knows that. So that's,
Right.
one
I
of the
know.
things.
I think we
Yeah.
forget that. Like God's like, like you are human. I know all of this about you, right?
Right.
Yes. You
Right.
don't have to clean it up for me.
Right.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Well, one of the things I think from your study is that you're painting the picture, or reminding us of the picture that Boaz is a redeemer for both Ruth and Naomi. So will you
Yeah.
talk to us just for a little bit about that?
For sure. Well, I think, again, going back to the stereotypical study of Ruth, which is beautiful and fine, is to look at Ruth and Boaz. But, Boaz is Ruth's guardian redeemer because of Naomi, because that guardian redeemer relationship. And for those of you that have not encountered that term, or that's kind of new to you, essentially it is a rule in ancient Israelite under God's people to say, if a man dies, his family must then assume the property and the care of his widows. So that is what a guardian redeemer was. And the beautiful thing about studying that guardian redeemer concept is that it's actually a precursor to what Jesus does for us.
Yeah.
So there's this beautiful, language and nuance that happens in God's word, which is just really inarticulatable to the human brain for the most part. But we study that in the book of in the renewed study. But Boaz is Ruth's guardian redeemer because of Naomi, because that guardian redeemer relationship comes from a relationship of Naomi's husband who is dead, not Ruth. And so, yes, of course, he marries Ruth, but he also assumes Naomi's property and taking care of her. In fact, that's the reason why, because there's this other guardian redeemer that shows up in the end, and it's like suspenseful, and you're like, what's going to happen? Who's going to marry Ruth? Well, the reason why he doesn't want to marry Ruth is because of Naomi. But Boaz says, yes, I will take on both of you. So Boaz is not just Ruth's guardian redeemer. He is also Naomi's. He's, the guardian redeemer because of Naomi, and he also covers Naomi. And then, Naomi is the one at the end. We see that, Ruth and Boaz have this beautiful son, which becomes an ancestor of Jesus, but we see it through Naomi's eyes. And at the very end of Ruth, the author says, Naomi has a son.
They
right?
celebrate because Naomi has a son, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
And there's no indication that she adopts the son or steals it or takes it away from Ruth. It's the way the author is framing that story is to remember, this is not just Ruth's triumph. This is Naomi's triumph too.
The family continues because of the redemption, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's so beautiful.
It is so beautiful. And I think with the property and the widows and that whole concept, there's this idea. What do you think about this? That the Redeemer can does something for them that they cannot do for themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. I love that you said that, because, in Israelite times, it's really hard for us today in 2020 to think back and see, oh, well, Ruth and Naomi really needed Boaz, because, we're smart, independent women, and we can take care of ourselves.
It's hard to identify with the desperation of the situation, I think. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when you really put yourself in the shoes of what's happening in that culture, that then allows you to even give Naomi more grace, because when she tells her daughters-in-law, it's more bitter for me than it is for you, she's not being dramatic, she's being truthful, because her daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, can go marry someone else. They're young, they can have babies, they can start a new life, but Naomi can't. And so, that I'm losing my train of thought because we're just talking about
we're jumping around a little. Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's just awesome. But yes, what you were saying was that, that Boaz provides something that Ruth and Naomi cannot provide for themselves, which points us to, that redemption, redeeming sacrifice on the cross that Jesus provides for us. We cannot provide access for ourselves to God because of our sin, but Jesus does that for us with his death on the cross. And so there's just some beautiful analogies.
It's gorgeous. And I think when I go back to like even that place space, that sharing space, and that I punched my card sort of thing. Like, there's this place when I'm in that place, like I've already punched my card. I don't deserve this. There's also something that he can provide in that redemption act that I cannot do for myself. Right. Because what I most need is peace. Right. That's what I know, and trust and peace, and remembering God is who he says he is, and all that. And I have a responsibility to open my heart to that, because it's always present, but he can flood my heart with that in a way that I cannot. I can't shop it, eat it, work it, whatever else I try to find it in, if you will. Only he can do that for me. That's my experience. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. We were, I was listening to, my son plays drums for the youth praise band at our church. And so
I was going to say lucky mom, but maybe if he's playing at the praise band, it's okay. But the early days of drums must. Anyway,
we have an electric drum set, Angie. So we took care of that real fast. So we're not getting those real things in my house. He has headphones.
Awesome.
But
anyway, I digress.
It's okay. But he plays the drums, and so I sat in on the worship service last night, and the pastor was talking about the passage from John, where Jesus, John chapter 6, where Jesus feeds the 5,000, and then he goes on to talk about how he is the bread of life, and the whole point of it was, we can want Jesus because he provides miracles. But do we want Jesus because he's better to us than anything else? And I've sat with that so much over the past 24 hours, because I think it's so real, to us, is that, we can want him because he provides all these things to us, and he does, and he will. That's his promise. But, do we believe him? Do we believe in him? Do we believe what he says? And do we believe that he is the best thing for us above all other things?
Right.
And I think that is the journey. And honestly, Angie, I think that's why we keep getting rescued over and over again, because it's not just about those rescue miracles that he provides for us. It's about his desire to have, this intimate, close relationship that is above all else for us. And that's the prize. That's the beauty. So that's another tangent, but
it's good.
It's a valuable one.
So good. Good stuff. I think of my own rescue, like how I would define that. I think some of my greatest moments of rescue, have been sort of like face down in my living room floor when I was sobbing over something old, right? And a piece came over, and somehow I knew I wouldn't have to do that again. There's this understanding that we're moving forward, right? Or that the miracle is the work that actually, I can't even articulate it right now to you, but if others have had those kind of experiences, I think they know what I'm talking about. But where there's this, you think about the miracle, I guess, is like the big, feeding the 5,000, however that would show up in our life. But for me, some of the most precious, largest miracles in my life have been those breakthroughs where I realized actually, you'll do this for me. I actually don't have to figure this out on my own.
Right.
Yeah. Because I wear myself out trying to figure it out on my own. That's just
absolutely.
That's just me. So how in the study is Naomi reminded, you were talking about provision and miracles and showing up and all that. How is Naomi reminded that God would always provide for her?
So I think this is a question that we can't fully answer, because we have hindsight. So we can make assumptions based on what she was maybe thinking after the fact. Because how you walk through, a really hard story, and you can look back on that season in your life and say, wow, God was really there with me in that. And with that hindsight, we can see that. Well, we have the privilege of reading Naomi's story through hindsight. But so here are some of the ways that I see through hindsight, when you study the book of Ruth through Naomi's lens, and I think maybe she would have picked up on in the end, hopefully. But one of the first ways is that he starts to work in her details. That whole first chapter of Ruth is just tragedy after tragedy and bitterness and grief. And then it ends with that little glimpse. And this is not an accident that was written this way. Ruth and Naomi return to Bethlehem. They return home to God's land just as the barley harvest was beginning. And, harvest is often synonymous with blessing and God's word. And so
that
that's
gives me chills just as you said it. Yes.
Right. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. And it has no if you don't know the context, you're like, why is that a big of a deal?
Yeah.
But it is, because that's again, the author, giving us a clue to say, God is up to something. Pay attention. And then the second chapter, you see God starting to work in her details. you see God starting to provide. Oh, by the way, Ruth, you need to go glean
Mhm.
some grain in someone's farm and field, so we can have something to eat. And oh, she just happens to be gleaning in Boaz's family, or his field, who just happens to be their a family, a family of a clan of Elimelech and a guardian redeemer. That's not an accident.
Right.
Those are things. And I think we don't know because we can't ask Naomi this question face to face, but I have to believe that as she's starting to see some of these pieces fall into place, she's realizing, wow, God really is on my side.
Mhm.
He really is for me. And then you see her boldness in chapter 3, where
Mhm.
she says, Ruth, we need to find you a husband, which is the equivalent today of you need a job.
Mhm.
We need to
Yeah.
provide for ourselves,
Yes.
to kind of take the
Yeah.
scandalous out of it and like the icky stuff out of it. Like, it's really not what she was saying. This was a very
Mhm.
practical
Yeah. Mhm.
suggestion she was making.
Mhm.
And she is the one that kind of puts forth that plan, even though she has no idea how the outcome is going to turn out. But she puts forward that plan and she takes that leap of faith. And it's that leap of faith combined with God's supernatural action that, excuse me, that brings this, redemptive quality into our life. And
Mhm.
so, we see God kind of loving Naomi through the human hands of Boaz and Ruth.
Mhm.
Because I love so much that Boaz sends Ruth home with like a double portion of the grain that she would normally have gleaned from his field. And she comes
Mhm.
home with like this abundance, which is just such a measure of God's quality, that he never works from a place of scarcity. He's always working from a place of abundance. And
I
so,
love that.
we see
Mhm.
Naomi's leap of faith in the beginning, and at the end, Ruth comes home with, hey, look, I have extra food for us. And
Right.
and so these are just little clues, is that, God is providing for Naomi. And I'd like to think that she recognized those in the moment. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I don't
Right.
know. It's one of my questions I want to ask her when we get to
I know,
heaven.
yeah, yeah. I'm teaching in the book of Nehemiah right now, and one of the
Mm,
themes that I see in Nehemiah is this combination, if that's the right word, or this connection of prayer and action. Like there's so
yes,
much prayer in
yes,
that book, but there's also like one of the themes is arise and build, and I see that in this story too that you're talking. Like there's this listening to God and feeling the nudges, I think, but then there's also you have to go and glean and you
yes,
have to go and do this. And so I think like even in our own situations, there is this time to cry out to him and receive from him. And then there's also a time to do for ourselves, like offer ourselves grace, as you were saying. But what does that look like in my daily activity, especially
right.
when we're in a place that kind of every day is hard for a little while, one of
Yes,
those places. Yeah. And this combination of it takes both from us. There's prayer that is faithful and there's action that is faithful, and I think both
yes.
of those things are evident in that book. I One of the things too that God's really been teaching me over the last few years is really being honest about the difference between wants and needs, which
Mm-hmm.
seems so like I don't know, simple, but it's not simple in my life anyway, because there are
Right.
things, right, that he's like, this is what you're saying to me, like Angie to God, right, that you need,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but your heart actually is not open to what you need, because what you need is underneath that. Like, they need food, but there's a different level of need for like an ongoing need. Like I need this situation to go away. No, actually you
Right.
need peace to be able to walk through the situation, and
Oh,
I
yes. I
and I
love that.
see I see those elements in this story as well too. I think they're subtle, but I believe that they're there because I think God is always about, it's about the greater redemption story. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
for
much for
sure.
us. Yeah.
Mm.
So what about Naomi's story brings you hope
Mm.
and hope for your situation? And I still want to talk to you just a little bit about your own life and your diagnosis and how this story probably relates and how it's encouraged you, but just hope in your life. How are you using the story to encourage others to have hope in their situations? Would you talk to us just for a minute about that?
Sure. Well, to kind of piggyback on what you were just saying, Angie, I think that this study and, the lessons that I learned as I was studying the book of Ruth from Naomi's perspective is it's a short and manageable, and I don't want to say the word self-help because it's not what I mean by this, but I mean, it gives you actionable steps to
Mm-hmm.
take when you
Mm-hmm.
are walking through a hard story that end with hope. And they're very manageable for whatever we're going through. And, that first one we've already talked about. about a little bit is that you have permission to grieve,
Yeah.
allow yourself a time and space to authentically grieve over your hard story. And then the second one of those, particularly, when we're walking through hard stories, it's often hard to see, where is God? How is he moving? That's kind of the next step for me, that I have found is like, okay, I have this hard story now. Where in the world is God in this? And, it's that second chapter of Ruth teaches us to look for God in our details, because he's working in our details. And we may not see the big picture, but we can start to train our minds to look for those small things, or we can see, what, God, that was you. I know you are moving in my details, whether I can see it or not. And hopefully I can, but even if I can't, like, it's just this reminder that he's not up, in heaven controlling puppet strings. Like, he wants to be in the nitty gritty with us. And so, it's, giving yourself permission to grieve and then starting to look for him in your details. And then that third step is, like you said, it's that action piece of it, which is so crucial to our faith journey. And, for me, one of my pain points in walking through hard stories, and the place where I usually plateau and just like give up, like stop, is I begin to feel helpless, like a victim, right?
Yes.
And, and that just makes me really stall out emotionally, physically, productivity, all of it. I'm just like, when I feel like I have no control and I am completely helpless, like, that's a really dangerous place for me to be. And so what that third chapter teaches me is that we are hopeful, not helpless. And we can still, take a step of faith. We can take baby steps on the things that we can change and wait for God to, work on the things that we can't. And it's that combination, of our baby leaps of faith or giant leaps of faith, and God's working through the details and working in our plans that brings us to the next stage, which is there is hope. God's promise for renewal. I mean, he renews Naomi's story in ways that are completely unfathomable, but that's not the only place where we see him renewing things and promising renewal. And it's an ongoing promise. It doesn't end. And so, it's just that, really manageable 4-step, process of, okay, let's acknowledge our grief. Let's look for God. Okay. Let's have the courage to take a baby step, and let's wait for that hope to come, because we know and we believe by now that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. So that's, that's one of the ways that the story encourages me in my hard story. And it also gives me, baby steps to think about instead of being overwhelmed with oh my gosh, this is completely unmanageable. Well, actually it is manageable. I'm just going to take one little step at a time. And I know that God's going to hold my hand through every step along the way. So those are the 4 things I would tell anyone walking with a hard story.
I think that's so beautiful. And I'm going to share this from my own life. About 10 years ago, I was in a head-on car crash and I was hurt really bad. And I was in rehab for about 9 months. And I remember at one point just kind of calling out to God. I wouldn't even say like faithfully, just pretty much like angrily or like blaming, almost kind of just like, why is this where I am? Why has this happened? Questions that don't really have answers, but we throw them up anyway. Right. And I really remember an invitation from him, which probably, like, hindsight, I would say it like kind of happened like this, but I think it probably unfolded over a period of time. And but really him inviting me, like, you have 2 options with this. You can just get better, like day by day, your body will heal. Right.
Yeah.
But I have these lessons for you. I have this beauty for you. I have this healing to do in your life at a much deeper level, that while we're walking through this place, I would love to do this with you. Right. But it's completely up to you, how you choose to go through these next months and even years, as this has changed your life dramatically. And where we go from here is largely up to you. And, and I remember that choice being very, it was something with God that I hadn't experienced before. Now I can see, I can look at other things before that and even since that, how we have that choice all the time, but maybe because that situation was so dramatic in my life, like it just like was really in front of me, like, you have a choice. And I'm doing something in you in the waiting or while you're healing, or like, I'm not just poof, this isn't going to go away. And I didn't do this to you, but I will do something in you through it,
Yes.
if you allow me to. And I was thinking about that so much as I was hearing you talk about that, because
Oh,
for some of us, the road is long, or
mhm.
as like you said, some of the women that you deal with, it's not going to go away. Like it does
Yeah.
not go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I share with you this verse?
Yeah.
This came to mind as you were chatting, and
Yeah.
you may
Yeah.
be familiar with this or not, but I had a very similar encounter with God when I was recovering from my latest surgeries. And I was, basically in bed in recovery for about 3 months. And it was long. And
Yes, it is
I
long.
was depressed, and
Mm-hmm.
I had, was really, really struggling with depression and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, to the point where, my question to God was, is there goodness on this side of heaven? Or have I maxed out on the good
Or is
times?
it
And
just a waiting game till I go home? Right.
right,
Yes. Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I was really struggling with. And
Mm-hmm.
God brought me to this passage at the end of Deuteronomy.
Mm-hmm.
In those ways that it just kind of, these verses kept showing up, and you're like, okay, I really have to pay attention to this. Thanks,
Yeah.
God.
Mm-hmm.
But this is Deuteronomy 30. It says, this day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now he's saying those words to the Israelite people, but those words, choose life, resonated so loudly with me. And it was, I heard the same thing from him, like you have a choice here. You
Yes.
can
Right.
choose life, or you can stay in bed,
Right.
sister.
Mm-hmm.
But if you choose life, I got you
Right.
either way. But we're
Yes.
going to do some things if you put your feet on the floor and
Right.
go. And
Yeah.
so that's what I did. And that right after that, my ministry started.
Oh, that's
So
beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that
I
we've
love
had
that
similar
too. Yeah.
teachings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. Well, if you will talk to us just a little bit about, I'm going to try to say it. It's vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Is that
You got
close?
it.
Okay. All right. I listened to you say it on your website. I was trying to get it right. So talk to us a little bit about what that is and what that means for you, and
Sure.
what it's kind of meant in your spiritual walk, if you would, just for a few minutes.
Sure. So in the fall of 2015, I started to experience just this slew of major medical events. I was a fitness instructor. I led a very active lifestyle. I was teaching about 11 classes a week, always in the gym or in the studio. And my husband and I realized that we got the news that we were pregnant, which was a surprise because we didn't think that we could have children. My son came with low dose fertility drugs. And so, we had not been using in any kind of protection for a while because we just didn't think it was possible. And I got pregnant. And we were overjoyed until we went to the doctor, and she said, there's the baby's doesn't have a heartbeat. And so I was going to miscarry. And so I did. I chose to miscarry naturally at home because I'm a bit of a hippie. And so I had, this miscarriage, and then the miscarriage resulted in, I went into the hospital for, I had this really bad kidney pain, and I found out, I had 2 aneurysms that were just kind of flaring up, and it caused me to lose about 10% of my kidney tissue. And so there was this kidney infarction. And then my left carotid artery ruptured. And so, these, 3 really major medical events that happened back to back to back to back. And so I went in for emergency surgery, and the doctor that was on call, this is an example of God being in my details, because the doctor that was on call that night at 3:30 in the morning was from Europe. And my condition is much more prevalent in Europe. There's the awareness about it is higher. It's growing. There's been some really great advocacy efforts in the States since I've been diagnosed. But then it was really basically unknown in the United States. But this doctor was from Paris, and she recognized it immediately. And she was putting together, my history from that fall to the fact that in 2010, my colon had ruptured. And in 2006, my son was born early because my membranes had ruptured. And in 1988, my mom had died because she had a splenic artery aneurysm. And she had all these like internal ruptures that they just couldn't heal. And so she's putting the pieces together and she looks at me and she says, I think you have, she called it collagenoses. And that's what apparently is what it's referred to in Europe. But she said, I want you to get genetic testing done. And so she said, I'm going to fix you, but I want you to get this testing done. And so she fixed me. And then we got the testing. And yes, it was positive that yes, of course, I had vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and I inherited it from my mom. And so when we got the diagnosis, my husband and I were like, great, what do we do? It's 2016. Let's fix this. What treatments do I do? What medicines do I take? And the doctor, my geneticist was, he's very kind and quiet and he had these compassionate eyes. And he said, there is no cure and there is no treatment. He said, there's nothing I can tell you. The average life expectancy for someone with your condition is 48. And he said, what I can tell you is to prepare your bucket list and live your life well. And so that was what sent me into 3 months of depression, not just the recovery, the surgical recovery, which was difficult, but, the awareness that my body was just not that good at holding itself together. And essentially that is the problem. It's a connective tissue disorder. And my body just doesn't spit out the glue. Collagen is the glue that holds your body together. And my body doesn't make it very well. And so, I had to come to terms with the fact that I, was a ticking time bomb for spontaneous rupture. It makes vascular Ehlers-Danlos makes blood vessels, arteries, and organs prone to spontaneous rupture. And so that's why I'd kind of experienced all these weird flukes of major medical events for someone that was relatively healthy
and young. Right.
Yes. So that's what I have. And, we were able to get closure for my mom. We had no idea in 88, this was on nobody's radar. So, the blessing was my family had closure on what had happened to my mom, but now we had to figure out, okay, how do we manage this and deal with this? And the reality that, I'm 43 this year and I'm walking towards that looming, terminal diagnosis. And the reality though is, Angie, we're all terminal.
Yes.
None of us is getting out of this earth alive. I just probably know how I'm going home. And, maybe it's around 48, maybe it's not. I don't know. My days were already numbered before this diagnosis came into our awareness because God ordained all the days of my life. But, that definitely has not come without battles with anxiety.
My goodness.
And I mean, I really struggle with that. A lot of the women in my community, that's one of their biggest issues because it's mine and it's, that's not going away.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a daily laying down of, God, I'm anxious about this particular thing. Help me through this day. And so anxiety has, resulted from it. But also, there's the good side and the bad side. The bad sides are the anxiety and I'm prone to depression. So I deal with that often already. And now on top of this, trying to figure out how do I leave my husband? How do I leave my son? Yeah. Those were the hardest things for me.
Of course.
And continue to be.
Yeah.
But then but there's also the surprising sweetness that has come from it too, Angie, that can only be attributed to the work of the Holy Spirit in my life. Because there's this sweetness to knowing that life is so precious. There is a sweetness to knowing, wow, these 24 hours are a gift. I did not expect to be here today. I can tell you that. I did not expect to live past my 40th birthday. And so there's just the sweetness of knowing that I feel like I'm living on borrowed time, and I'm not. I'm living on God's time for my life. But I'm so grateful, and that changes your attitude and your perspective.
It does.
And, you really quickly can discern what's important and what's not.
Yeah.
And so that, that kind of helps me live a life that is, that I think that a lot of people search their entire lives for. Honestly, they're looking for that contentment and the ordinary and the mundane, and the gratitude for life. And when you come face to face with the fact that, you're going to die, you get that. And I don't mean to sound morbid, but it is, I mean, it changes the way you live.
Yes.
So those are some of the ways.
I appreciate you sharing some of that so much. I know that's going to be encouraging, and I can relate to it in some ways because we say often, that I feel like I'm living on borrowed time because of the car crash and what didn't happen and how, people people are like, I cannot believe you survived that, and all.
Mhm.
And it does just change. And my kid, I don't mean to be morbid either, but like, my kids will say something or about dying or whatever. And they're like, and I'll answer like, we're all going to die. Like,
That's
they're
right.
like, am I going to die? And I'm like, well, probably not today, but yes, you are, and they're like, Mom, but I'm like, no, I think that needs to be more, a safe conversation, more practical conversation than it is, because I think there needs to be this like reality. Yes, we are. And that's part of this. Like, this is part of this. And it's actually to be looked forward to, even though of course we don't look forward to the pain or the leaving, of people who will be hurt. But I just really appreciate your testimony around that. And my guess is that that's a daily decision also.
Oh,
right?
it is. It is.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, one of the ways that God is challenging me now, as I'm processing it is thinking about, we think about our lives in 2 stages, maybe even in 3 stages. If you are a believer and Jesus as your savior, there's the first piece where you don't know him. And then the second stage is when you do know him. And then the third stage is when you see him face to face. There's three stages in our life. And oftentimes, I think in our minds, we put like this mental break, this wall between our life here on earth and then our life in heaven. And so one of the ways that God is challenging me is to really like break that wall down and see like there's really 2 stages in our life. And it's, when we don't know him and when we do know him. And eternal life does not start when I see Jesus face to face. It started when he became my savior at age 12. And so that moment where I'm ushered into his presence is really, it's just a stepping stone. And, he's really challenging me to see death as my servant and not as something to be feared, because, when I, die, it's just it's a blink of an eye transition to seeing Jesus face to face. There is no wall. It's, it's just, we're living this continuing time spectrum, of, okay, it starts now and it doesn't end. So we don't know what this other, section is going to look like, but there's no need to fear this. Like, let's take this wall out of it and realize that it's, it's just a stepping stone to a reality that the Bible promises will be glorious.
Yes.
So, we can look forward to that and realize that, we're one. Like today, I'm grateful for my day here on this rainy day here in earth, but I'm also one step closer to seeing my savior face to face. And that's beautiful news to me.
Yeah.
So,
that's
not something everyone,
no, it's beautiful.
Not something everyone likes to think about,
no,
but I think if we take that fear out of it and start to view it as, this is a good thing, then death won't be so scary.
Yeah. We fear what we don't know or what we don't understand. And then, and it's a real act of faith to say, but I believe that it will be glorious because he says so. And I'm going to believe he is who he says he is. And he does what he says he does. Yeah. So, I'm watching our time and I've kept you longer than I intended already. Okay. I'm sorry, but can I ask, I love it. I mean, if you're okay, I'm okay. But I want to ask you just one more thing, because I read on your bio or on your website or something that you are a huge Disney buff. I used to, this is true, right? Yes. I used to work for Disney. And so anybody who loves Disney with the same passion I do, we have to connect on this. And so before I let you go, I just have to ask, what makes it so wonderful for you? Look at you. Oh my goodness. Can you see behind me?
Yes.
This is my Disney wall that you might be able to see behind me.
I do. Yes. I see Ariel.
With my little cast member badge on in the black square. I don't know if you can see that.
I love that so much. Where were you, at Disney World or Disneyland?
I worked at the main gate at the Magic Kingdom, and then also over at the Transportation Ticket Center. And yes, so look at you. I love it.
Well, these are actually from,
yay.
These are from Disneyland, because I've never been to Disneyland, but my precious friend, they went. And so she had these made for me. I collect ears, so I can't reach them all. I would show you my collection. They're right underneath my desk, but I collect all kinds of ears. But yes, I love Disney. If there's one thing I talk about almost as much as Jesus, it's Disney.
Me too.
Because it's so happy. I love that you work there. That's my dream. Like, I want to be the fairy godmother. Like, I like if I ever retire from what I'm doing right now, and if I have this space in it, like I want to go to Disney World. I want to be the fairy godmother. That's my dream job. You would be
wonderful at that. I think you would be wonderful at that. No, I love it. We've been so lucky. Lucky. I don't know. We're very blessed, but I get to go like usually once or twice a year. Like it's really bad. Like I go quite a bit. I'm just very fortunate that I get to, and I just like never get tired of it. It never gets old at all.
We were so on my Facebook memories, we were there 3 years ago this week.
Okay.
And
so it pops up like every day now, reminding you that
right. And we go every year. We try to go every year. So when
Yeah.
my son was 7, we took him for the first time. And I've always been a Disney nut, but I really didn't fall in love with it as madly as I am right now until I saw it through his eyes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so that just changed it for us. So since
Yes.
then, we've gone every year for the most part, and we haven't gone this year because of COVID,
I know.
which is
Yes.
breaking our heart. So we're seeing all these memories pop up. And my
Yeah.
husband, we were just talking yesterday, when can we go?
I
Because
know.
it's killing us. We really want to go. So we stayed at, it doesn't matter what resort we can get into. We
Yeah.
stay on property. We go all in.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love it. I am such a Disney nerd. I love
And
it.
your husband is okay with it too. Like he likes it. Okay. I just have to, because sometimes there's a
Yes.
divide there.
So he will not admit it, but I
Okay.
suspect that he is as big of a nerd as I am.
We
He
won't
loves
call him out then.
He loves the food. So he'll
Oh,
go
yes.
for the food and also the fun. Like, and he's the one that told me last night, he was like, I
Yeah.
really want to go, but he
Yeah.
doesn't do the Mickey t-shirts. I am full on, like, I have glitter on my face. I am full on Disney dress when I go, because
I
it's just
love
fun.
it.
Like, I have an
Yes.
entire Disney wardrobe.
Yes.
He just looks like a dad, but that's
I
okay.
pretty much have a different Disney t-shirt, tank top, something for every day we're there. Yeah, oh yeah, we do the whole thing.
I love that so much. Oh my gosh. I love
Heather,
Disney.
this has been wonderful talking to you today. It
Ditto.
has been so encouraging, and I just really appreciate it. I love you because you love Disney, but I just love your heart and your honesty about your struggle, your willingness to use that to encourage other people in theirs. It is beautiful, and we're so grateful for your time today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Angie.
Yes, we're gonna sign off, but until next time.
Okay.
Peace.
Take care.
I loved how Heather talked about God working in our details. In my hurry to get to a place of more comfort, I tend to overlook some of the things God is teaching me about Himself as He walks alongside me in whatever I am facing. Heather said she hopes to be able to create a safe place for us to explore our hard stories, and I believe she is doing exactly that. Thank you so much for listening. I pray that wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.